Are you all comfortable with the proposed 46.25% tax rate? Any discussion you want to have on the tax rate?
Two related things that in my mind, getting comfortable with the tax rate, two related matters. One of those is, what is the genesis of the 3.25% salary increase? It seems to be that in my 2 years, it's been the same number both years. How do we come to that percentage?
We do a salary survey, and I think I actually have some of that with me. The police and fire do a salary survey every year, and we try to look to see if we are staying even, if we're losing ground. I told you all the other day that we are, we think we're very competitive. We are not too high, we are not at the bottom. We are certainly, I would say, middle to top in our salaries. We try to stay there so you don't lose your police officers and firemen to other cities. And so we look at that each year, and we try to see, you've got to obviously look at to see if we can afford we've typically tried to maybe give a 3%, particularly in a year when you're doing a 14% insurance increase, to see, you know, is a person who makes a salary of maybe a field tech, are they going to even have enough to pay their insurance? You look at that kind of stuff. But then you try to see, overall, are we going to remain competitive? We met with the police and fire based on their surveys. We felt like the 3.25 would keep us competitive. In going to the meetings of the City Managers Association, we believe that other cities are doing more, but we felt like where we were in the range, we would remain competitive. So we look at that every year, and obviously if we were getting way above the top, then we would feel comfortable to drop that maybe down. It has been 2% some years. There were some years it was nothing during the recession. But it's ranged between 2 and 4.
Yeah, we don't want to end up being what Dallas is dealing with right now, where they got officers, you know, going to Plano and getting 50% more money.
You all saw that the other day. We have our complete salary plan is in the book, and it is in tab 7. And you heard a lot of conversation about where the starting salary was for police officers the other day on the news, and you heard some of the numbers, and Dallas was at 45,000, and you saw them marching on City Hall. Our starting salary for a police officer is 60. You heard Plano was kind of top end of that at like 66. They'd given a couple figures, but Dallas was asking for a 15% pay raise because they were so I would tell you at our 60, we're comfortable. We don't compare to Dallas and Fort Worth. We compare to Hurst, Euless, Bedford, Grapevine, and I do have those surveys, and we try to stay middle to top of that, because you don't want to spend all your time investing in the training of those folks and be a recruiting ground for all of your neighboring cities.
And I remember a time when we were.
And that is not a good thing, a good place to be. Another place that we are very competitive is dispatchers. It is very, very difficult to get good dispatchers and keep them trained, and so we do not want to lose our dispatchers. I would just, we can give you, it's all in here for you to look at of any position in the city that you're interested in. When you get into our non-exempt pay plan, I would tell you that I would not pay any attention to merit top. Our employees will either be at start, or they'll be at end of year 1, 2, or 3 generally. Is where they'll be. They top out at year 3. And merit top is a theoretical number that's there, but most people are at end of year 3. And so if you would look at a utility billing clerk, they make $36,000 a year. If you look at a court clerk, they make $37,000 a year. That's the same as the office techs in Janina's department. That's $37,000 a year for a starting pay. Obviously, what we try to do is move them up through a step plan years 1, 2, and 3, and then they're topped out at that point. If you look over to our exempt pay plan, I will call your attention to one thing that happened this year that you may have read about in the newspapers. There was a change at the federal level in who you can consider to be an exempt employee. And if you do not pay someone at least $47,370 or something like that, you have to pay them overtime. So our pay plan now, our first level, we had to do only an adjustment in like the grade 295 and grade 305, I believe it was, actually it was only in grade 295, to make sure that that grade started at that, because the alternative would be you'd have to pay all that in overtime. And so I think there was about 3 positions that we had that were below that federally mandated level. We converted one of those to hourly, and the other 2, I think, received an additional $500 or so in bump in pay. And that's obviously less expensive than paying overtime, because those are positions that work a lot of hours. And so like for some of those, y'all, you can certainly see that. You can see all of our pays. And most of our employees, again, they're in that range, are going to be start to mid.
And I was thinking about cost of living this year, Kiplinger forecast to come in at 1.8%. So that's certainly just the cost of living next year will be 1.8% higher for our employees. And then if they're paying insurance for themselves, their wife, and their family, that could be another 1 to 1.23%. Almost their entire increase is consumed.
I think I looked at that for some of our lower paid employees that would get the
Yeah,
3.25, and I looked to see if they had family coverage. And I believe at that level of kind of what I'd said, of kind of like that entry field check or office check, I believe they were going to net about $300 for the year after insurance. And the insurance increases, we've got those for you in tab 7.
7-10.
7,
Yeah,
sorry, let me get there. 7-10, so an employee, I would presume that if you are at that level, you probably will elect our Plan B, which is the less expensive of those. But your increase per month for family coverage for a Plan B is going to be $60, $62 a month. And so if you were in that $37,000 range and you get the 3.25% increase in your salary, then you've got to pay out your $62 a month for your health insurance. I think I had figured out they were going to net $300 or $400 for the year. So we look at all of that, but the main thing we look at is to try to make sure we're not falling behind in our salary surveys, and to make sure that we're not going to be losing, particularly in our public safety and in some of those critical positions, our employees to other cities. Because you spend a tremendous amount of time training those folks to get them ready.
Well, that's the right metric. I was holding it to the metric of what has inflation been and what is insurance increase. But the real metric is, are we competitive?
And that's what we try to look at. And that's exactly what our police and fire, they do their own surveys, and they come in and we propose to them what we're going to recommend, and then they let us know if they think that's acceptable. And this year they felt like that would keep them in line, and I think there will be some cities that are trying to do a little bit more, but they feel like they have fallen behind, and we feel like that will keep us kind of, I'll say, 3/4 of the way in the pack.
And I could be wrong, but I believe in the inflation number, the cost of living number, insurance is in that number already. So we don't want to double dip and say, well, you're at 1.8 and then another rate on insurance, because I think in the basket, insurance is already in there. Yeah, but I mean, there's only so much we can do. And what would it be, for example, for family coverage, what's their proportion per month?
If they're in our Plan A, their portion is $702 per month. If they're in Plan B, it's $506.
Yeah, see, and that's significantly cheaper than what I pay in my company for my portion of insurance. So we're already, I mean, it's just life, you know. And I would love to be able to say we could take care of everybody, but we can't, you know.
I'd look at the other way though. We get so conservative. If we don't think about it from the employee standpoint, like I was trying to.
Yeah.
Has flaws in the way I think. But if we don't think about it from the employee standpoint, we've got to say, what else, where else could the employee go to get a different situation?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why we do the surveys. We've got to make sure that we're competitive in our business.
And after we're competitive,
Yeah, then that's all we can do. We can't, we've got a great place to work, we have a great working environment, and we want to be equal from a monetary you know, the intangibles, I don't think any other cities can touch us with the intangibles. But we've got to be in the ballpark, you're right. We could have great intangibles, but if the money's terrible, people are gonna go elsewhere.
Right.
But if we're in the ballpark money-wise, our intangibles are what keep our people here. You know, I just don't think there's a situation as we looked at on that insurance. There's only so much money, and it's not our money.
3.25 pounds is the right number in my mind. The other thing was, there's 6 vehicles with less than 50,000 miles that were replaced, notably 2 dump trucks at $88,000. What benefit would it be to set a mileage limit as well as a year limit on when we replace?
Kyle looks at all those factors, but when you think about a dump truck, you think about the fact there is no reason for it to ever leave the city limits of the city of Euless unless it's going to, I guess, the landfill or something. So you're never going to get a lot of miles on that, but I think you will also look and see the age of those dump trucks. You finally can get to a point where it's parts availability, it's their maintenance records. So he doesn't just say, it's got 50,000 miles, it's time to get rid of it. He's looking at the maintenance records, he's looking at parts availability, and if you look at that, that's a 1999 dump truck that we're replacing.
And I've seen them in the park, I mean, I've seen.
And so it really goes to its condition and its maintenance. But those kinds of vehicles, for the most part, are not going to have a tremendous amount of miles because they're gonna get into that truck in the morning, they're going to load it up with whatever it needs, they're gonna drive it to its job site, and it's gonna sit there until they complete their work, and they're gonna drive it back to either the parks or the public works yard and park it. So it's only gonna go a few miles, but you're gonna reach a point where that, obviously it's approaching, I guess that's 18 years old.
Plus, it's hard
It's-
miles.
Yeah, pardon me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is gonna, so he's looking at the totality of that. And I think Kyle does an excellent job of stretching the life of these things until as long and as far as he can. But when you get to a point where either your parts availability or your maintenance costs are exceeding his standard, then he would recommend those for
He
replacement.
does do an excellent
So-
job of stretching the life.
Well, and it's one of those things, I don't know how many dump trucks we actually have, but if we lose 2, you know, we're really in trouble.
Yeah.
Because they're working every day.
Those 2 are in our
You
streets
can't go to Hertz and
department.
rent one.
And
You know?
so.
And there are no reserve dump trucks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he does have mileage standards, but the other thing he looks at a lot is their maintenance records, and he has all that.
And then additionally, I mean, that's the sand and the salt for a snow day
Yeah,
as
They
well.
use them
that's
for
right.
a number of things, so.
Yeah, you just can't afford to be down on whatever our fleet is. You can't lose any amount of those and do your work. Like I said, you can't go over to DFW Airport and rent one.
Yeah, the other 2 that stuck out at me is the brand new pickup truck, when we've got one in the parking lot all the time that has 32,000 miles on it or something.
Do you remember which one that was in particular that you were?
Where, 5?
It's at 5-10.
Yeah, the fleet truck, 23,862 miles on it. 3/4 ton pickup, toward the top.
Yes, and I see that is one that is a 2001, so it's 16 years old, so I would have to check with Kyle to see what its particular condition is, but my guess is that even though, again, it may be one of those situations that it hasn't gone that many places, but at 16 years old, it may be reaching the point. And one of the things that we also do is that when one comes due for replacement, if we happen to have anything that is still in reasonably good condition,
I like
then
that.
sometimes we have situations where, a great example is the CFA uses vehicles to go and collect the backboards from the hospitals. So what will happen if there is a good vehicle that is still in reasonable condition, we don't necessarily just put that in auction. Sometimes what you do is we call it a DNR. And it means it's not eligible for replacement any longer. It's been replaced, but it may get shuffled down. And so we don't
better,
necessarily go
something
out and buy a new truck to give to the volunteers to drive to the hospitals to go collect the backboards. But we would shuffle that truck out to auction and give them a better vehicle. And that's usually more like the SUVs. And so if there is a place where we are using, and we do that from time to time, where we're using a vehicle that is not eligible for replacement. Citizen on patrol is another good example. If we have an SUV, we don't go buy a vehicle for citizens on patrol to use. But if we have a good SUV that has reached end of life from our perspective, then we would pass that down to citizens on patrol. We would allow them to, and then we would take the one they're in that's probably even older and with more miles, and we would auction that one off and allow them the use of the good one. So all of our items are listed on Lone Star Auction when we sell them. And so I think when you will go out there and you'll see the condition of these, for the most part, if there's one that still had some good life left in it, we will evaluate whether it should have a different home in the city. And a lot of times these will actually be shifted if we've determined that a particular department's got to have a newer or better one, but another department has something that's even older, we will shift to that department and get some more life out of it. So it doesn't just necessarily go to auction because it's reached end of life.
A good example, Ms. Emery, police department, they have 4 school resource officers. By contract, those officers are supposed to have a marked squad car. The school, part of their contract is that there's a marked squad car sitting in front of that school. They get, you wouldn't want to drive those cars or anything. But the only thing is those officers pick them up in the morning, they drive them to that school and park them. They're in the school all day long, they drive them back. They don't get any miles, but they've had all their miles, they've been used and abused tremendously before they get to that point and then passed down to them, so.
So, yeah, that would be an example of if one of those is in really bad condition. We're not gonna go buy a new car to park at the school, but we would shift one of these down and take that one to auction. So that's not unusual at all for us to do that.
So could that happen then? Because you're right, the SRO, they're the old logo, they're just this nasty bar at the top. Could we take some of these 2012s, the sport utility vehicles?
They will. They'll take, if they have older cars that are better than those cars, but they're not to the point where they want to still run them in the fleet. Right. They'll move them down, and then those cars will go to auction.
And I haven't noticed it, and I'm sorry, I didn't want to go down this path, but I haven't noticed it so far yet. But I remember Bluebonnet and the overtime available for the previous highway construction, and they would always say, don't take the new cars, take the older ones, because you're just going to sit out there for 10 hours with just lights on, kind of thing. Have we seen much overtime with Southgate needing resources to help with? I've seen it some when they shut down highway or
Yes and
157.
no. Southgate does theirs different than Bluebonnet from the standpoint that Bluebonnet absolutely wanted just police officers, and they wanted local police officers. So theirs was a constant, and we were involved in that.
Right.
And there wasn't enough police officers between 35 and our city limits for each of those cities to support their part of the city. So that's hence the reason some of you would see ours, we set limits, they couldn't go any further than 820
Or whatever,
and
yeah.
that kind of stuff. Southgate does some police officers. They do a lot of stuff with private stuff also.
Okay.
And so they tend to use police officers just where they truly need that traffic protection, that sworn person that has that authority to be out there. And so it's not as much, but they are doing some. And you're absolutely correct. The police department pushes real hard. They use a lot of school resource officers' cars for that because it does have a light bar. It is marked. Doesn't have the laptop. It doesn't have video cameras. There's 2 reasons for that. Number one, we don't have that big a fleet, so they want to keep the good cars for the officers that are actually out there working the streets to have a good vehicle. The other side of that is there is a certain amount of risk anytime you are on a freeway
For that protection.
for protection. That part of the whole reason that you got that protection is so you hit it before they hit where the people are. And so we absolutely know that some of those vehicles tend to be put more at risk.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna hit one, we'd rather hit a 10-year-old one that's
Done.
done anyway than to hit a new one.
And I think that's where I was seeing these 3 utilities for, you know, I could see them as being highway protection through this next 18 months. Do we really need to auction these off just yet? But that wasn't my call to make. I was just, that was in my head of, that'd be nice to use these 3 for highway protection or for Southgate operations, then it would be.
And Kyle looks at that, and there is an absolute, and he does a great job of balancing whether it's worth keeping, what it might bring at an auction versus if it wouldn't bring anything, maybe it is worth being a throwdown car or something like that.
Yeah.
But there is absolutely a lot of thought that goes into all that. And whoever was asking about mileage, they look at all those vehicles to see that they get mileage. I can tell you in the police department, and sometimes everybody kind of gets their favorite of what they like to drive. But if you got cars that are getting driven more than some cars, then they literally sergeant will go in there and say, you're not driving these cars for the next week, 2 weeks or whatnot, because we've got cars that aren't getting miles put on. And so that's kind of a constant balancing act.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, if there's a vehicle in the fleet, Kyle reviews that to check. Now, obviously, like the dump truck, it makes sense. It's going to go to the job site. It's going to stop. It's going to go back home. It's not going to be driving all over the city. But if you have a car in a fleet of someone that you would expect to be putting miles on and it's not, then we want to know, why is the car not being used? If you said you need the car, then when we bought the car, why is the car not being used? And you might remember back in the day, a long time ago, when we tried to get into some really energy efficient cars and we got the Prism. People didn't like the Prism. They didn't want to drive the Prism. We said, you must use the Prism. And so we do pay attention to that, and it was really funny to see Steve Eskew in the Prism. Yeah. But I mean, there are times that for various reasons that, you know, we have ended up with something that they didn't necessarily like, but we do monitor that. The other thing we try to protect against, and about the shifting down, we do look for those opportunities. What we don't want to do, though, is get into a situation where we DNR a whole lot of things and create an expectation that they're going to be replaced, because then you're growing your fleet, and that becomes an expense. So we are careful that if we have a DNR that needs a home and there's a real need, we will do it. But we are pretty careful not to just say, you know, somebody says, well, I'd like to have that. The answer is typically no if there's not a need, because they'll get used to having it, and then in 2 years they'll go, it'll finally die, and they'll say, oh, I need another car. If there was, you don't want to grow the fleet unnecessarily, so we try to strike a balance of that. We'll do that when if there's absolutely a need, but try not to grow it.
Cool.
The question was asked earlier, and I want to make sure, go back to the tax rate, because I think it may well be asked of you all, and I want to make sure you have the answer. In this budget, 1 penny now generates $322,000. And so we're cutting it by ½ cent. That's $160,000. If you look at page 10, you will see that in our general fund, after we have recommended everything we've recommended and proposed, there's $7,400 left over. So if you are asked, what does it take to cut the tax rate more? It's $322,000 for every penny. And then at that point, we would have to start deciding what is it that we do not want to fund. You know, the 3 firemen are in there, that's a penny. I mean, you can cut the 3 firemen out of the budget and not have 3 firemen, and you can get a penny. You can cut the street maintenance out of there and get 3/4 of a penny. So are there decisions that could be made that are different than the ones we've recommended? Absolutely, and don't want to mislead you on that. There are things that, you know, I would not recommend. I mean, you can see clearly where the money has gone, so you could say, don't give a 3.25% paid package, cut it back to something less. That's, you know, I don't really think not funding insurance is not really an option unless we want to go in and do something drastic today on our insurance program. Not funding our rebates is not an option because we have contractual obligations there. We obviously must pay our utilities and our contractual obligations. Anything in the professional technical you know, without, could you drop out of NETS or HEB Transit or some of those programs? You could, but you would have to eliminate a service to do that. Equipment replacement, could we not fund it properly at the 100%? Sure, you could pick up some money. But those are the choices that we could make. So we have recommended this, that the ones that I would say that are on the table that compete for an additional reduction in the tax rate is obviously your supplemental programs, which are in the general fund. That is your 3 firemen and your public works field tech. You'll recall that the athletic coordinators pay from EDC, so that is not impacting your property tax rate. And then it's your 175,000 plus the 50,000 we added for street maintenance. You know, can you fund those from one time? Yes. There's going to reach a point where our growth is done, our build out is done, and then we will not have $900,000 to pay for street maintenance, and our streets will not be repaired. So we've recommended what we think is a good sound budget, but I don't want to say that certainly there are options if those are the choices we would have.
Well, I think what we have to look at is we're maintaining most services and increasing some services by adding the police and fire. We're reducing the tax rate. Yes, people with higher valued houses are going to pay more. But you know, if I go buy more groceries, I'm going to pay more sales tax. And that's my personal opinion on property tax. If my house is worth more, I'm going to pay a higher tax bill. That's just life in the big city. Put on the big boy pants and deal with it. We can't look at 2017 and say, okay, we're just going to deal with this budget. We have to look at what it's going to be down the road. Yes, we could do some cuts this year and kick the can down the road, but somebody's going to pay that bill. And I think what we're doing here with the budget you guys put together lets us deal with this year and gets us in good shape for next year, the next year, the next year, and the next year. And for when we get fully built out, we're going to be in much better shape than some of our neighboring cities are.
And it's very, very easy to look like a hero and lower the tax rate. You come out smelling like a rose. I lowered the tax rate 2 cents. But when it comes time there, you're going to need that 2 cents. It's really hard to raise it.
Yeah.
I always agree.
And we budget so conservatively anyway.
So, I mean, obviously, we are one of the lowest in the area. We said the other day, I do expect that some of our neighboring cities will be giving 2 cents cut. I would venture to you that I believe they are going to be in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 cents higher than us today. So, again, you can't tell that story without looking at all the facts. Again, we've said Fort Worth has been very public with the fact that they intend to give a 2 or 3 cent reduction. They are at 85 cents. We are at 46 cents. So that if you tell half of that story and you don't tell the other half, it's very,
And
very
it's not like
deceiving.
Fort Worth gives more services than we do.
I would venture a guess that, I will start by saying I'm biased, but I venture a guess to you that the level of service provided by the city of Euless exceeds most cities. I mean, if you call our city, most likely someone will be at your house, if not today, tomorrow. And we take that newspaper complaint very seriously. We will come out there and pick up that newspaper. Chris and I have personally gone to pick up trash and put it in our cars. And so our employees do that, we do that.
Their council does that.
The council does that. I mean, we do try to set that level of expectation, and y'all saw that our employee staffing is far less than most, so.
And it's the entire work environment in Euless. Everybody cares. And that goes back to staying even on par.
Yeah.
But we've instilled a great work ethic in everybody in Euless, and they're proud.
But
They
we
want to
do
see
try to
proud.
take, we do, and I say we, I think the citizens have always been very supportive of taking care of, we tell our employees, you take care of the citizens and they take care of you, and we try to pay them fairly. I think they feel like they're treated fairly. We've tried to have fair insurance, and I think they believe that, and we stress that to them. But I think they understand that they have to give that service level in order to be able to expect citizens to be willing to pay for their
Well,
salaries
and
and
also, when you
benefits.
look at the way we are so much less debt per capita than any of our neighbors. I mean, you take a look at Grapevine, they have the highest sales tax and the highest debt. You know,